Oh, Merry Christmas. There's, I guess we all have favorite Christmas shows, carols, stories that we like to watch, hear, or read at this time of the year. I have to agree with those two sociological experts, Mike and Mike in the morning on ESPN, Mike Golick and Mike Greenberg. I just don't like the kids show Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer at all. Basically a kid who's different is bullied and rejected, and even his father isn't sure he wants him around until he's useful. Then all of a sudden he's just fine. Let's have him join us. I'm a little skeptical about that particular show. But A Charlie Brown Christmas has to be one of the best. I can't watch it without a tear coming to my eye. Can't even think about it. But it's hard to imagine, but it's true. As this show was being produced, it was the first Charlie Brown special, and the network executives were pondering whether they had made a good choice. Most of us, we just see a show. We don't realize that all along people have been making money decisions. And, they realized as they looked at Rough Prince, what a terrible show about a kid depressed at Christmas. The music they considered terrible. All those familiar songs that we now know, the song Linus and Lucy and Wintertime is Here and all the other ones that are there. Oh, that was awful music. But the worst part was that, as you know, when Charlie Brown just can't seem to pull it together, Linus gets up and recites the King James Version of this story. I had a friend remind me a few years ago, we need to hear the King James Version once a year, and that's for this story we know very well. And so they were going to cancel it, and then they realized, we put this much money into it. Let's show it once. It'll be forgotten. No one will remember it, and that'll be the end of the Charlie Brown franchise, and we won't have to deal with any of this anymore. Boy, were they wrong. When we hear a lot of these stories this morning at sharing time where people are really struggling, where people have lost loved ones, we need to hear that. Because the light is shining in the darkness. Not for those people who have their act together and wouldn't even think about coming to church this morning, but for all those who are broken, here and at home. Folks who make coming here a regular part of their week because they're not sure they can get through the week without it. Yeah. And the three scriptures this morning speak to that. Because this is not some fantasy. This is the real world. The last couple of weeks we've been looking a little bit at Isaiah. And there are passages, and I've told you that King Ahaz has failed. He has failed to listen to the word of the Lord. He is pinning all his hopes on a political compromise with Assyria, which is a big mistake. And Isaiah's message has been coming in these early chapters clear, that God is sending an infant to fix these things. That's absolutely absurd. But as he says, let me find for unto us is born a son is given to us, for unto us is born a child, a son is given to us, and the government is upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, or Marvelous, or whatever you want to say that, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. God has a different plan and is willing to start over in our lives, both in ancient history and right now. And God's plan is wonderful. It is a different style of leadership. As one of the more unfamiliar verses was read this morning, God will take all the bloodied garments from war, all of the weapons of war, and destroy them. And with it, that aching heart, because God wishes to continue this story. Now, it's not easy for us to change this perspective. It's not easy for us to say, oh, okay, everything will be fine. When we read headlines, when we hear voices of hatred, when we see racism loosed again upon the world, and that things we thought had been settled suddenly become unsettled. And so the Apostle Paul, writing to his friend Titus, says to him, God will train you up into holiness and wisdom. And that word, train you up, is an athletic word, because it isn't easy necessarily for us to begin to discipline ourselves to think in God's terms instead of the world's terms. So this word, from which we get the word pedagogue, also means athletic trainer. That means God is sending your conscience, God is sending His Spirit to inflame your conscience, to give you a swift kick, because as we train, we always know good enough is good enough. That's why we go to therapy after surgery. That's why we have therapy when we're recovering from an injury, because we'll go, oh, I did my exercise. Good. I'm going to get all better. And the therapist says, no, you didn't, and pushes and pulls, and tears come to our eyes. And we need God's Spirit, as Paul tells Titus, if we are truly going to be disciples of Jesus Christ, to push us further than the world wants us to go, so that every action, every prayer, every thought, every word glorifies Jesus Christ and is not simply expedient or spoken to keep us out of trouble. Because we need to have that training. Everything that's happening is happening in the real world. I mean, the very beginning of this story, it tells us that a decree went out. Now, we don't have that decree that Caesar Augustus gave, but oddly enough, just a century later, here's one gave me the chance to do a little translating, which I like, but it's from a local governor to Alexandria in the year 104 AD, from Gaius Vibius Maximus, prefect of Egypt. Since the house-to-house census has begun, it's essential that everyone in their district return to their homes in order that the registration by household may be completed, so they may still grow crops necessary to pay their taxes. Knowing that the city of Alexandria has need for the work done by farmers, I wish for everyone who thinks they have a good reason for remaining here in Alexandria, register themselves before the deadline. You can get a permit for this from the cavalry commander Festus, whom I appointed for this purpose, by the 30th of this month. There's another order, probably very similar to what the emperor gave. This one happens to have survived from antiquity, saying, you got to go to your house. That's inconvenient, but I want you to go to your house to register. If you can't go there, you better apply for your exemption early. After all, we don't want farmers to miss out on growing things. So, little pro-farmer stuff here. So it starts off that way, and it then deals with reality. A pregnant woman, 3 days from home, 3 days walk from home. You've heard me say before, she may have ridden on a donkey on your Christmas card, but it doesn't say anything about riding on a donkey in the Bible. Why would you waste a perfectly good beast on a 3-day journey like that when you need to have animals in order to take care of the work? You wouldn't put a pregnant woman on a John Deere tractor and send her on a 3-day journey down the road. You want to take care of the tractor, right? You're going to need it. So I think she walked. And they get there to Bethlehem. And here is where the King James Version lets us down, and the Common English Bible, which was read for the other two, does a much better job. Like it says, let me find my verse here. And the time, let's see. The time came, and she gave birth to her firstborn, and she wrapped him in, and we can translate that, swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the guest room. It's not in. It's just a house like yours and mine. There wasn't room in the guest room, so Joseph and Mary have to go into the regular house, which of course is a single room, the one part of the floor for the people a little higher, the one part for the animals a little lower, but it's all there. They're not being put into a cave or a barn. The guest room is already full because we always save that for grandma and grandpa. They get first pick because they're older. So they go down there. There's room. In the real world, there's room for Mary and Joseph. In the real world, there's room for a baby. No matter what the political situation, no matter what the census, whatever's happening with the emperor, in the real world, when you watch television and you see real need, there is room in your hearts. You contribute, you respond, you act. In the real world, there's room for refugees in this country and even in our county because there was room for baby Jesus. As for the rest of it, the angels are sent not to the emperor, not to the governor Quirinius, not to anybody that thinks they're important, but to shepherds. And in that era, shepherds were in disrepute because thanks to a debt crisis that had happened in this era, most shepherds had to sell their flocks and then watch somebody else's sheep. Rich people bought up all the sheep, and they no longer own their own, but that was what they knew how to do. And obviously, there's a difference between owning your own business and working for somebody else. So here are these desperate shepherds, having lost everything, now receiving a message from an angel to give them the word they desperately need. In your own hearts, in your own struggles, where you feel you're not measuring up, where your dreams have not come fully true, God is speaking, because this all happens in the real world that we live in and tells us what we need. There is grace that opens up our hearts. There is grace that gives us a door when we think we've been pushed into a corner. And then we have a choice. Are we going to walk through the new door that Jesus Christ is creating in each one of your lives? And for each one of you, this may be different. Are you ready to choose what Jesus intends? I am. I hope you are. And I hope you see that the story set in the real world is full of desperation. What do you do when the baby's coming and you can't stop? But it's also filled with hope. I'll never forget, in a very brutal winter, nearly 40 years ago, when Jenny and I were in a seminary, and we were snowed in. There was no way to get in or out of the seminary in Chicago. And one of our friends was expecting, and we knew that if she went into labor, there was no way to get her to the hospital, that she would have to be born there in our little apartment complex. And, she said, what do I do if the labor pains start? Well, Jenny's mother had some advice she gave by phone, which is cross your legs, which we all know does no good at all. But the child, who by being born 11 days late, was able to be born in a hospital, but also, as a result, had severe hearing difficulties, is now an ordained minister in the Church of the Brethren and a pastor of a Church of the Brethren congregation, and who uses his physical disability to enable others. There's a way. Make the choice for Jesus. Make the choice for hope. Block out the naysayers and remember that unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. And that's where all the responsibility of the future is given. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Amen.